The restaurant buzzed with low chatter and clinking glasses, its golden chandeliers casting warm light on polished marble floors. In the center of the room, Victor Kane, a celebrated 38-year-old white male actor with sharp features and perfectly styled hair, sat at a corner table with an entourage of producers. The scent of truffle risotto and aged wine filled the air as Jamal Brooks, a 36-year-old black male waiter with calm, steady eyes and a neatly pressed uniform, approached with a tray. Victor smirked and said, "Look at this guy, straight out of a fashion disaster." His entourage chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to join in or look away. Jamal's jaw tightened, but his tone remained measured as he asked, "Would you like me to recommend the chef's special, sir?" Victor leaned back, eyeing him as though he were a character in a bad joke. "No need, I can see you've already got your hands full with your unique look." Laughter rippled through the table, cruel and sharp. Around them, other guests pretended not to listen, though their eyes betrayed discomfort. Jamal's hands didn't shake, but the weight of every stare pressed on him like a stone. Jamal's voice remained steady as he described the chef's special, but each syllable felt weighed down by the audience's silent judgment. Victor chuckled, swirling his champagne as if the world were his private stage. "You must get all the ladies with that distinctive face," he said, his words dripping with mockery. A few at the table stifled laughter, others sipped wine to avoid speaking. The sting in Jamal's chest was sharp but familiar, a ghost from years past. His hands didn't tremble, they had learned not to. The polished silver tray seemed heavier now, the crystal glasses rattling faintly against its surface. Somewhere in the room, a waiter dropped a fork, the metallic clang echoing like an unwanted spotlight. Jamal met Victor's eyes for a fraction of a second, not with anger but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. "Will there be anything else for your table, sir?" he asked, the question layered with meaning Victor couldn't yet decipher. The surrounding noise dinned in Jamal's mind, every sound replaced by the steady beat of his own heart. Victor leaned forward, elbows on the table, grinning like a schoolboy with a cruel secret. "Tell me, do they give you that uniform to make you look taller, or is it just for show?" he said. His entourage laughed louder this time, emboldened by his brazenness. Jamal inhaled slowly, letting the air fill his lungs, refusing to let the jab pierce deeper than the surface. Years of working in high-end dining had taught him to weather storms behind polite smiles. His gaze shifted to a couple nearby, who looked away too quickly, ashamed at being caught listening. He returned his focus to Victor, offering the faintest nod. Not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the moment. "Your main courses will be ready shortly," he said, voice steady, tone professional, as though the insults had been nothing but background noise. A young hostess in a black dress glided past, her eyes flicking toward the table before quickly returning to her task. The air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. Victor reclined again, a satisfied glint in his eyes as he took another sip of champagne. One of the producers muttered something under his breath, earning a laugh from Victor. Jamal turned slightly, catching sight of his reflection in a tall mirror along the wall, a reminder of the man he had become and the battles he had fought silently. The reflection stared back with dignity and tact, even under fire. He adjusted the tray in his hand, its polished surface reflecting Victor's smirk like an unspoken challenge. "Enjoy your drinks," Jamal said, turning to step away, his shoulders squared and his stride unbroken. As Jamal walked toward the kitchen, the hum of the restaurant returned, though a few pairs of eyes still followed him. He passed by another waiter, who gave him a subtle nod of respect, the kind only those who have endured know how to give. In the distance, Victor's laughter echoed, chasing him like an unwelcome shadow. Jamal pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, the air inside thicker with the aroma of seared steak and garlic butter. He set the tray down with precision, his breathing steady, his mind already locking away the sting of the moment. One of the line cooks glanced up, eyebrows raised in silent question. Jamal offered a small knowing smile before turning toward the prep station. The battle wasn't over, but neither was his resolve. The kitchen's heat pressed against Jamal's skin, but his mind drifted far from the sizzle of pans and the clatter of plates. Memories crept in, nights spent as a child staring out a cracked apartment window, wondering why his father never came home. His mother's voice had always been soft yet tired, telling him to be strong, that the world wouldn't make it easy for him. The scent of garlic butter faded into the faint aroma of laundry detergent from his youth, when he would help her fold clothes late into the night. Jamal had learned early that dignity was his shield, silence his sword. Now, standing in the kitchen, he realized how those years had prepared him for moments like tonight, moments where a man's worth was weighed in glances and cruel words. One of the younger waiters passed by whispering, "Ignore him, man." Jamal nodded, not because he agreed, but because his energy was focused on something deeper, the quiet, stubborn truth that his story wasn't over yet. Later that night, Jamal sat alone in his modest apartment, a second-floor walk-up with peeling paint on the doorframe. The city hummed outside, sirens in the distance, faint bass from a passing car. He poured himself a glass of water, watching condensation bead along the sides. On the coffee table lay an old photograph. Him as a boy, about 8 years old, standing beside his mother in front of a faded brick building. His small hand clutched hers tightly, his smile thin and uncertain. The other side of the picture had always been blank. No father's arm around his shoulder, no shared laughter frozen in time. Jamal picked it up, tracing the worn edges with his thumb. "You deserved better, Ma," he murmured, the words carried into the stillness. Outside, the street lamp cast pale light through the blinds, painting stripes across his tired face. He remembered the last conversation he had with his mother before she passed, her voice hoarse but steady. "Don't let this world tell you who you are, Jamal. You tell them." Those words had become his compass, even when the path was cruel. Tonight, as Victor's voice echoed in his memory, Jamal felt the weight of her wisdom pressing against his chest. He stood and crossed the room, opening a small wooden box on the shelf. Inside were mementos. A bus ticket from a trip they took together, a church program from her memorial, and a folded letter with handwriting he hadn't been able to read without choking. He didn't unfold it now. Instead, he closed the box gently, as though sealing the past for another time. He sat back down, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, his gaze fixed on nothing and everything all at once. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and forgiving. Jamal brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the quiet room. He leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, unread messages from friends, a few from his manager reminding him of shifts, and one from a number he didn't recognize. It was short, "We need to talk." Jamal stared at it for a long moment, his brow furrowing. He deleted nothing, replied to nothing, simply let the phone rest face down on the counter. The coffee steamed in his mug, untouched. Somewhere deep down, he felt a flicker of intuition, that the world was about to rearrange itself in a way he couldn't yet predict. At work later that day, the restaurant was quieter than usual, the lunchtime crowd still trickling in. Jamal moved between tables with the same practiced grace, greeting regulars and setting fresh glasses of water. But beneath the surface his mind drifted. The strange message from the morning lingered in his thoughts like a whisper he couldn't shake. He passed by the mirror near the bar and caught his own eyes, seeing both the man he had become and the boy who had always wanted answers. Somewhere in the dining room, Victor's name floated in hushed conversation between two guests, their tones conspiratorial. Jamal didn't stop, didn't flinch, but the knot in his chest tightened just a little more. The late afternoon sun dipped low, pouring warm amber light through the restaurant's tall windows. Jamal carried a tray of freshly polished wine glasses toward the bar when the door opened, and Victor Kane walked in again, this time without the entourage. The sound of his expensive shoes against the marble floor drew attention. He wore a casual black blazer over a crisp white shirt, but the confidence in his stride was the same. Jamal's breath slowed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he set the tray down with precision. Victor glanced around, spotting Jamal instantly, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't think I'd be back so soon, did you?" he said as he approached. A few patrons turned their heads, sensing tension. Jamal met his gaze calmly, the same quiet resolve from the night before radiating through his stillness. "You're always welcome, sir," he replied evenly, though each word felt like walking a tightrope. Victor took a seat at the bar, leaning on the polished mahogany surface as though it were his private stage. "How's the uniform treating you today?" he asked, voice dripping with mockery disguised as small talk. Jamal poured him a glass of sparkling water without looking up, the bubbles rising in the sunlight like tiny silver beads. "It served me well for years," Jamal said, placing the glass gently in front of him. Victor chuckled, tapping his fingers against the wood. "Still keeping that poker face, huh? Guess you've had plenty of practice." The air felt heavier, tension building like a storm waiting to break. The bartender glanced between them, sensing the undercurrent but saying nothing. Jamal stood steady, his posture unyielding, as if every slight only rooted him deeper. A pair of tourists seated nearby whispered to each other, their glances flicking toward the bar. Victor noticed and raised his voice slightly, making sure the room could hear. "I guess some people are born for the spotlight, and some are born to polish glasses for those who are." His words landed like a pebble dropped into still water, the ripples spreading across the room. Jamal's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained locked on Victor's. "Some of us work for what we have," Jamal said quietly, "and some just inherit it." For the first time, Victor's smirk faltered. The bartender froze mid-polish, waiting for the next exchange. The hum of conversation in the restaurant seemed to fade, replaced by the weight of the moment. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bar, his tone sharpening. "Careful, you might make people think you've got a personal stake in this." Jamal's brow lifted just slightly, his expression unreadable. "Everyone's got a stake in something," he replied, his voice low but steady. Victor's eyes narrowed, studying him as though searching for cracks in armor. The bartender cleared his throat, breaking the tension just enough for Victor to smirk again and take a sip of his drink. The moment passed, but the room still held on to its unease, like a bowstring pulled taut. When Victor finally stood to leave, he placed a folded bill on the counter, sliding it toward Jamal with deliberate slowness. "For the performance," he said, his voice laced with mockery. Jamal didn't touch it, letting the bill rest between them like a dare. "I don't get paid to entertain," he replied, eyes fixed on Victor's. For a brief second, something unguarded flashed in Victor's expression, recognition, maybe even discomfort, before he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him, but the weight of his presence lingered in the golden-lit room. Jamal exhaled slowly, the knot in his chest tightening into something sharper, something that felt like the beginning of a confrontation neither man could avoid. The following evening, the restaurant's dinner service was in full swing, the warm glow of chandeliers bouncing off crystal glasses and polished silverware. Jamal moved between tables with his usual calm, but his focus fractured when he saw Victor enter again, this time with a small group, laughter trailing behind him. Their table was positioned near the center of the dining room, impossible to ignore. Victor's eyes found Jamal quickly, a flicker of something unreadable flashing before his smirk returned. Jamal approached with professional composure, menu in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said evenly. Victor leaned back in his chair, tilting his head. "You again. Guess I just can't escape you," Jamal replied, "or maybe it's the other way around." A few guests nearby glanced up, sensing the shift in tone, though the clinking of cutlery continued like a distant metronome. Victor scanned the menu lazily before glancing up. "So what's the special tonight? Something as memorable as last time?" The sarcasm clung to his words. Jamal kept his tone steady. "Grilled sea bass with saffron risotto, sir." Victor nodded slowly, eyes narrowing as if trying to place a puzzle piece. "You've got a familiar look, you know," he said, his voice softer but edged with curiosity. Jamal didn't respond, focusing on noting their orders. "No, seriously?" Victor pressed. "It's like I've seen you before." The air seemed to thicken, and a few seconds passed before Jamal finally met his gaze. "Maybe you have," he said, the words holding a quiet weight that made Victor's smirk falter. As Jamal stepped away to place the order, Victor's conversation with his guests faded into the background of his own thoughts. He kept glancing toward the kitchen doors, watching for the waiter's return. Something about the man's posture, the sharp line of his jaw, the steady eyes, it tugged at a place in his memory he hadn't opened in years. When Jamal returned with a bottle of wine, Victor couldn't help himself. "Where'd you grow up?" he asked suddenly. Jamal paused, setting the bottle on the table with measured precision. "South Side," he said simply. Victor's brow furrowed. "Same as me," he murmured under his breath. The guests glanced between them, sensing something strange unfolding. Victor leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, voice dropping so only Jamal could hear. "What's your last name?" The question hung in the air like a drawn breath. Jamal straightened, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Brooks." Victor froze, eyes widening as if a door had just been kicked open in his mind. His guests looked at him in confusion, but Victor was somewhere else, somewhere years back, remembering whispers about a child his father had left behind. "My father's name was Robert Kane," Jamal added, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. The table fell silent. The restaurant noise seemed to fade, replaced by the pounding of Victor's heart in his ears. The words landed like a blow. Victor's smirk vanished entirely, replaced by a raw, unguarded expression he rarely showed in public. Jamal didn't move, didn't blink, his presence a quiet storm. "You were saying," Victor began, but Jamal finished for him. "We have the same father." The guests stared in stunned silence, unsure whether to speak. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere nearby, the only sound in the room. Victor leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving Jamal's. "That's impossible," he whispered, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Jamal's lips pressed into a firm line. "Believe what you want," he said, before turning and walking toward the kitchen, leaving Victor rooted in place, questions clawing at his mind. The kitchen doors swung open with a sharp creak as Victor stepped inside, ignoring the startled looks from the staff. The heat from the stoves clashed with the chill in his voice. "We need to talk, now," he said, his tone low but hard. Jamal didn't flinch, continuing to plate an order with calm precision. "You're not supposed to be back here," he replied evenly. Victor stepped closer, the clink of his shoes loud against the tiled floor. "Don't play games, is it true?" he demanded. Jamal finally turned, meeting his brother's eyes with a steady, unblinking gaze. "Yes," he said. "It's true." Around them, the kitchen seemed to pause, the air charged with something far heavier than the scent of seared meat and garlic. Victor's voice cracked despite his effort to control it. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Jamal's lips tightened. "Maybe they thought you wouldn't care." The words hit harder than any insult could. Victor's fists curled at his sides, but his eyes stayed locked on Jamal. "You think I'm like him? That I'd walk away?" Jamal's voice sharpened. "You didn't have to walk away. You never even showed up." The room seemed smaller, hotter, as the air thickened with unspoken years. A sous chef ducked into the pantry to escape the tension. The brothers stood motionless, their silence as loud as their words. Jamal took a slow step forward, his voice steady, but filled with years of weight. "While you were walking red carpets, I was watching Mom work double shifts to keep the lights on. She died before she ever knew you existed." Victor's throat tightened, his eyes glistening despite himself. "I didn't know," he whispered. Jamal's stare didn't waver. "But you do now." The hum of the kitchen appliances felt deafening in the stillness that followed. For a moment, Victor looked like a man stripped of his armor, his usual arrogance replaced with something raw. Shame, maybe even regret. Victor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I want to make this right." Jamal shook his head slowly. "It's not about fixing the past. It's about owning it." Victor swallowed hard, his jaw clenching as if holding back words. "I didn't ask to be your brother," Jamal continued, "but I'm not going to let you disrespect me and think it doesn't matter." Victor's gaze broke for the first time, falling to the tiled floor. The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to taste, every staff member pretending to work while their ears strained toward the confrontation. Finally, Victor looked up, his voice rough. "Then tell me what you want from me." Jamal studied him for a long moment, the noise of the kitchen fading into silence. "Respect," he said simply. "And the truth." The words hung between them, heavy and unshakable. Victor nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. He turned and walked toward the kitchen doors, pushing them open into the golden light of the dining room. Jamal stood still, his chest rising and falling slowly. The battle wasn't over, but the ground beneath them had shifted forever. The dining room was quieter now, the last of the dinner crowd filtering out into the cool night air. Jamal stepped outside for his break, the city's hum wrapping around him like a familiar song. Across the street, Victor stood alone under a street lamp, the golden light cutting through the shadows on his face. He wasn't smiling, his hands were shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. Jamal considered walking the other way, but something in Victor's stillness stopped him. Slowly, he crossed the street, each step a small act of will. They stood a few feet apart, the night air cool between them. "You didn't have to follow me," Jamal said quietly. "I'm not here to argue," Victor replied, his voice low, almost unsure. Victor shifted his weight, looking down the street before meeting Jamal's eyes again. "I don't know how to start making this right," he admitted, the words awkward and heavy. Jamal's jaw worked silently before he spoke. "You start by not pretending this never happened." A car passed, its headlights briefly washing them both in white before the darkness returned. Victor's gaze held steady, but there was no challenge in it now. Only a quiet willingness to listen. "I can't change what our father did," he said. "But I can choose what I do now." Jamal gave a short nod, neither forgiving nor rejecting, simply acknowledging the truth in his words. For a while, they stood in silence, the sound of distant laughter drifting from a nearby bar. Jamal thought of his mother's voice, of her telling him to stand tall, even when the world tried to bow him. Victor thought of his own childhood, the expensive schools, the absence of questions about who else his father might have left behind. "She deserved better," Jamal said finally. Victor nodded once, his voice rough. "So did you." The air felt lighter in that moment, not healed, but no longer weighed down by denial. Jamal exhaled slowly, as though letting out a breath he'd been holding for decades. Victor took a cautious step closer, his voice almost a whisper. "I'd like to see you again. Not here, not at work. Just as brothers." Jamal studied him for a long beat, searching for insincerity but finding none. "That's a start," he said, the words carrying both caution and possibility. Victor gave a faint nod, as if agreeing to terms unspoken. They didn't shake hands, didn't embrace. The space between them was still heavy with the past, but the edges were softer now. A breeze swept through, rustling leaves along the curb, and for the first time that night, neither of them looked away. Eventually, Jamal glanced at his watch and stepped back toward the restaurant. "I have to finish my shift," he said. Victor gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then I'll let you go." Jamal turned toward the door, his reflection briefly appearing in the restaurant's glass before he disappeared inside. Victor remained on the sidewalk watching him go, the night's cool air wrapping around him like a question with no easy answer. Somewhere between the street lamp's glow and the city's shadows, the space between them felt less like a wall and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. The restaurant had closed for the night, the last of the staff slipping quietly into the cool city air. Jamal wiped down the final table, the soft swish of the cloth, the only sound in the dimly lit dining room. Outside, through the tall windows, he could see Victor leaning against a lamppost, not moving, just watching the door. Jamal hesitated for a moment, his reflection in the glass overlapping with Victor's silhouette beyond it. He thought about the years they had lost, the moments they could never reclaim. Yet there was something different now. A thread connecting them, fragile but present. He hung the cloth over the edge of the counter, walked to the door, and pushed it open into the quiet night. Victor straightened as Jamal stepped out, the street lamp casting both their shadows long across the pavement. "You didn't have to wait," Jamal said, his voice calm but not unkind. Victor shrugged lightly. "I know. I wanted to." The city was quieter now, the hum of traffic distant, the occasional bark of a dog breaking the stillness. They stood side by side, not touching, but closer than before. A light breeze stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off. For the first time their silence wasn't a wall, it was a space they shared. Victor glanced at Jamal, his expression softer than it had been in any of their encounters. "If you'll let me, I'd like to hear about her," he said. Jamal turned his head slightly, measuring his brother's intent. "Maybe not tonight," he replied. "But someday." The words carried no promise of forgiveness, only the possibility of a conversation that had never existed before. Victor nodded slowly, accepting the pace at which this bridge would be built. Passing car sent a ripple of light across their faces before disappearing into the dark. They began walking, their steps slow, unhurried. The city stretched before them, neon signs flickering in the distance. Neither man knew where this road would lead, but both were moving forward, if only slightly. Jamal kept his hands in his pockets, Victor with his loosely at his sides. They didn't speak, but the absence of words no longer felt like avoidance. Instead, it felt like the opening chapter of something undefined but alive. At the corner, they stopped. Jamal looked toward his street, Victor toward his hotel. "Guess this is where we part for now," Victor said. Jamal nodded once. "For now." They shared one last look, not of strangers, not quite of brothers, but of men who now carried a shared truth. As Jamal turned and walked away, Victor stood under the glow of the street lamp, watching him go. The night held its breath, as if marking the moment. Somewhere in the darkness, the fragile thread between them tightened, refusing to break.